Our speaker today, Matthew Manning, is the son of a pastor from Austin, Texas. He attended HBCU Howard University for undergraduate work, followed by the University of Toledo College of Law with a full scholarship. Matt is board president of the Coastal Bend Food Bank, a board member of the Corpus Christi Young Lawyers Association, and was the District 12 director of the Texas Young Lawyers Association until May of 2024. He received the 2016 Criminal Defense Lawyer of the Year Award from the Coastal Bend Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, the 2020 LULAC Pillar of the Community Award, and the 2020 NAACP Presidential Award. Matt's endeavors in social justice and civil rights have earned him the nickname Manning of the People. Please welcome Matthew Manning.
Can y'all hear me okay? No. Thanks, Judge. Gotta turn it on, Matt. Hello? Mic?
Hit the button on it, it should show a number there.
Sean 1. Group 1. Mike,
There we go.
Mike. Make some noise for Nick Gilby in the back. My guy, Nick. Give him a round of applause. Okay. I think we're in business. Let me first say I didn't write that bio myself. He stole it from my firm website. I'm not that arrogant, but I'm pretty close. As you know, my name is Matt Manning. I'm truly honored to be with you here today. I take umbrage with the term sermon. I'm not going to give you a sermon today. I'm not a pastor. Up the road in my hometown, Austin, my father is giving an actual sermon as a pastor, and I think that this pulpit, this sacred space deserves much more than I'm able to give it, so I can't call it a sermon. But I am going to give you a little presentation, and if you know me, I'm want to preach, so it'll essentially will sound like a sermon. But it is not a sermon. And if you look at the title of my presentation today, it says report and recommendations. Everybody say report. Report. Everybody say recommendations. All right. Who here knows what that means? Have you ever seen that before? Raise your hand. Okay. All right. All right. What does that mean?
So they're telling you about something, and then they're telling you what you should do.
Y'all give her a round of applause. Come on. I didn't know she was looking through the windows in my house. That's kind of creepy. But all jokes aside, in the federal system, if you have federal litigation and you try your case or you try aspects of your case in front of a magistrate, what he or she will do is they will write a report and they will make recommendations to the district judge to determine whether he or she should adopt their recommendations. Here's how that is applicable today. I think in society, we have a lot of conversations, a lot of reports about the past, about past abuses, about a lot of past problems, about current consequences of those past problems. But we do not always correlate that to appropriate recommendations. And when we talk about Juneteenth, if you make the mistake of inviting me somewhere to speak, I guarantee you I will be committed to one thing and one thing only, and that is truth. Everybody say the truth. And when we start looking at Juneteenth, Juneteenth is a joyous holiday. And for my forebears, it was the combination, the culmination of what they had fought for years. But Juneteenth is also a tragic holiday, if we're going to be 100% honest. And I have always been deeply conflicted by Juneteenth, and especially in the modern era, how we corporatize things like Juneteenth and pride. And all of these things that a very small subsect of people for years have fought to have recognized, and once it becomes valuable to society at large, it now becomes a thing. So in truth, and in respect to my forebears and those who fought for me to stand here as a free man, we are going to talk about Juneteenth and the truth. Everybody say the truth. Does anybody have a problem with that? Because if you do, there's the door. All right. Report and recommendations. Let's see if we can get this to work. Where do I need to click, Nick? Over here. My bad. All right. Let's see. Yes, it's everybody relax. It's on. All right, Nick, can you go through for me, please? Make it simple. Okay. I've explained to you what that means. Go to the next slide, please, Nick. Okay. Now, it's very hard for me to read, but I'll summarize some of this for you. First things first, Juneteenth is a point way down the line in history. Where do we start before we start with Juneteenth? We start where? We start in Africa. And what do we start that happened in Africa? We start with the transatlantic slave trade. Now, I'm going to vacillate today between the use of words like slavery and human trafficking, between the use of words like enslaved and victimized. Because here's the thing. The people who were brought to this country and to all parts of North America from whom I'm descended were heroes. They were not victims, and they were never property. They were in a position where they were legally treated as property, but they were trafficked from the African continent. And I think to give them honor, we need to call them people and not slaves. But unfortunately, we're all conditioned such that we use that terminology, so forgive me where I use it. The first thing, though, is approximately 12.5 million Africans were trafficked from the African continent to America, or to, rather, the New World. And of that 12.5, approximately 10.7 made it across the Middle Passage. What does that mean? Let's do a little math. How many people did not make it to these shores? Nearly 2 million people, right? But not all died in violent circumstances. Some passed away from illness. And some, in the ultimate act of autonomy, did what? They said, I will not be enslaved. I'm going to end my life in the way where I'm in control. And I give honor to them. But of that 10.7 million who made it to the New World, how many do you think made it here to the United States? I know you can see it up there. Only about 500,000, believe it or not. Where did most trafficked Africans go? The Caribbean, and where else? Dulaim. They went to Brazil, right, and to South America. Brazil, in fact, had about 4 million enslaved Africans at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. Now, what you need to know about that is what's important is of all those people who came to the New World, there were vastly different approaches to chattel slavery, number one, and to when chattel slavery ended. What was the first country to abolish slavery? Haiti. Shout out to Judge Westergren. Haiti. In the year 1803, Dutty Boukman and Toussaint Louverture overthrew, right, the Haitian stand-up, the Haitian revolt. They overthrew the people who owned the enslaved there and established a republic. Now, the problem is, more than 200 years later, we are still dealing with the issues of colonialism, right? Because Haiti has not, unfortunately, been able to pull itself to the level of stability because of Western involvement. Nonetheless, Haiti starts the abolition movement. What was the last country in the New World to abolish slavery? No. Brazil. What year? Very close. I'm impressed. 1888. In 1888 is when it became illegal in the country of Brazil to have enslaved Africans. So the reason that's important is there was not commonality on when that peculiar institution, as the Confederacy called it, when it ended, okay? But we're dealing today with the vestiges of slavery. And we're going to have that conversation throughout my presentation. Please give me the next slide, Nick. Okay. So, Texas. Was Texas one of the 13 original colonies? See, here's the problem. I don't know if they even teach you that in Texas public schools anymore, right? Because they might teach you, like, first off, white people were here first. There were no Native Americans, right? Texas was an original I don't know. I'm joking. Because we don't know what they're teaching in public education because everything's under assault. In any event, in the state of Texas, when Stephen F. Austin and that contingent came over from Missouri, I believe is where it was, they came over and they incentivized slave ownership. And they said, if you bring enslaved people, we will give you 80 acres of land for each enslaved person you bring. In the 1820s, I think it was 1824. And the reason they wanted you to bring enslaved people, why? Because what they want to make money off of. What each one of y'all got on every one of your shirts on your back? Cotton. Cotton was king, as you've heard, right? So they incentivized the ownership of Africans for the purpose of the cotton crop. And I wanted to put this quote in here so you know that this is unequivocally what it was. Stephen F. Austin is quoted as saying, "The principal product that will elevate us from poverty is cotton, and we cannot do this without the help of slaves." And the reason it's important for me to give you these words is because one of the things that we've seen happen in our society, especially when it comes to conversations of the Civil War, is we see a dishonesty that I find insidious. What was the Civil War about? Right, but what do people tell you the Civil War was about? States' rights. The states' rights to do what? To own slaves, okay? This was not publicly broadcast, but I had a case one time in Clayburgh County in front of John Hubert, who I consider a nice enough guy. He's a friend. He's a kind enough guy, except John is very off base about a lot of his politics, and he tried to argue me down one day that the Civil War was not about slavery, that it was about states' rights. And I said, John, I was born at night, not last night, and here's the problem. If you look at the founding documents of the Confederacy, what do they say it was about? It was about slavery. So it's important, and I told you I was going to yell, I'm sorry. It is important for us to recognize that this is not supposition. This is exactly what they said it was. We need to have slaves because we need to make money off of cotton. Now, here's the problem. If you came to Texas about that time, who was in control of Texas? And what was Mexico doing when it came to slavery? Now, Mexico did have slavery, but it abolished it much, much earlier. And that was a fundamental tension between the settlers and the people who lived in early Texas. Because people who brought enslaved people said, I want to keep my enslaved people, and they never knew whether Mexico was going to allow that. And what a lot of people don't know that I want you to leave here with today is Mexico was one of the primary safe havens for enslaved people from Texas. More than 5,000 enslaved Africans fled from Texas to Mexico, where they were treated with the humanity we should give our fellow brothers and sisters. So, viva Mexico. Give me the next slide, please. Continuing on. So, the Constitution of the Republic of Texas has a quote that I wanted to read in that same vein as Stephen F. Austin. All persons of color who were slaves for life previous to their immigration to Texas and who are now held in bondage shall remain in the like state of servitude. You can tell a lawyer wrote this. Like state of servitude. Congress shall pass no laws to prohibit immigrants from bringing their slaves into the Republic with them and holding them by the same tenure by which such slaves were held in the United States. Nor shall Congress have the power to emancipate slaves, nor shall any slaveholder be allowed to emancipate his or her slave without the consent of Congress unless he or she shall send his or her slave or slaves without the limits of the Republic. Was Texas a slave state when it established its Constitution? It was an independent nation. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for refining that. It was an independent nation. There are people who think Texas is still an independent nation, who want Texas to become an independent nation. But at the point that this Constitution was ratified, it was unequivocally in the documents. What? Matt Manning's ilk are what? Property. And when we talk about truth, that's one of the things that chaps my hide almost every day. A lot of my practice is civil rights. So I file civil rights lawsuits on behalf of people. I read the Constitution all the time, and I argue the Constitution all the time. And every single time I hear somebody make a textualist argument, what do you think I say to them in response? Shout out to Elise, keeping it 100% real, right to it. She said, you're making it sound like this bullshit. Thank you. What were black people in the Constitution? Let's go, who said that? 3/5, 60% of a person. So if you believe in textualism, me and every black person in this room and every black person outside of these confines was not considered a whole person, right? At the time that our Constitution was ratified. And this brings up a lot of the fundamental tension that we have in this country. We like to say things to make ourselves feel good even if we know it isn't true. What happened in the wake of George Floyd? There were a lot of protests, right? How did the mainstream media cover those protests? Riots. Thank you. Riots. These black and brown and trans and queer and people we don't like are out here, right? And they mongrelize us to look as though we are not fully human. But what do they teach your kids in their history class? The Boston Tea Party was an act of what? Progress and patriotism. Destruction of property. They don't call it criminal mischief. It was just the colonists standing up for themselves. But let 5,000 Negroes walk down Congress Avenue in Austin, Texas. What happened? Everybody got long guns. We're scared. Call APD. That's the reality of it. Switch the slide, please. So, I give you all of this context because it's important, if you know the West African principle, Sankofa, for us to look back and pull forward. That's what that word means, from the Akan people. And the reason I think that's important here is because we can't have a meaningful conversation about Juneteenth until we talk about the context in which Juneteenth occurred. So, in 1850, the census in Texas reported 58,161 slaves, which was 27% of the 212,000 people in the state of Texas. Okay, and in 1860, which is how many years before Juneteenth? 5. Thank you. Bree, right? Alana. I thought it was Bree. 1860, 5 years before. That's 30%. So roughly a third of the people in the census counted were people who were enslaved. 1 in 4 white Texas families, go back please, Nick. 1 in 4 white Texas families owned enslaved people. So we're talking a quarter of the people, okay? Let me know in 1863, President Lincoln does what? He issues the what? Okay, what is the Emancipation Proclamation?
All slaves is the Confederate States.
Are what? Are free, right, okay. Were the people in Texas freed on January 1st, 1863? Did somebody say hell no? Hell no, they weren't. Sir, ma'am, relax, please. Okay, in any event, okay, we were not free. And here's one of the things that's interesting that people may not realize, okay, that in terms of the Civil War, as far as I have seen documented, a lot of that fighting did not reach where there were high concentrations of enslaved people in Texas, right? And I'm really glad you gave the qualifier earlier about it being enslaved people in the Confederate States being freed. Now, I looked it up today because I wasn't sure when the telegraph was invented. The reason that's germane is because I thought it doesn't make sense to me that it would take 2 years. And there are diverging beliefs on why it took so long. There are beliefs that there was a messenger headed to Texas and people realized he was coming to set the slaves free and he got offed, allegedly. There's a belief that maybe the plantation owners knew and just never told their slaves, also very plausible. And even a belief that federal troops knew, but they did not enforce the Emancipation Proclamation because they wanted the planters to have a final planting and harvest season before the slaves were liberated. I don't know which one of those things is true, but this to me is the crux of what makes Juneteenth a tragic holiday. The idea that for generations, people were treated as property and born into a system where they were not regarded as humans. And by virtue of their geography, they worked for 2 extra years until they were told in June, on June 19th, 1865, that they were in fact free. Would you please go to the next slide? Now the last point on that slide, previous slide, said that the Trans-Mississippi Division of the Confederate Army surrendered on June 2nd of 1865. And what's interesting about that is, 1, I did not realize that until I did a little research, but 2, that's a lot closer in time to Juneteenth than I ever realized, okay? So that does mean that there must have been some issue in transfer of information, but 2 years is still very hard for anyone to imagine, right? That it would take 2 years for them to get this information. So, hey, come on, woo. I need somebody to put me in E flat over there. You about to preach. That's right. Some people still haven't gotten it. We're going to talk about that. So, the Union troops go to Galveston. I'm going to say Georgetown. Galveston, okay? My mother is from Texas City. My great-grandfather had a church in Galveston, on Galveston Island for like 50 years, okay? So it is very possible that I am literally descended from people who found out about Juneteenth in the original Juneteenth. I don't have that on good authority, but it's not a hard assumption to make, considering where my family is from. And if you know the history of Juneteenth, it was Major General Granger who came into Galveston and let the people know that they were freed. But I wanted to read General Order Number 3, which is the order that let people know they were free, so we can really dissect this. Are y'all okay with that? Okay. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. Put a pin in that. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes, put a pin in that, and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Let's take a few steps back. Okay. The connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. What does that mean? Got to keep working. What else does it mean, though? You're free, but you're not really what? This is your boss now. This was your master before, but now he or she is your boss. Not you are free. Not you have the autonomy to decide the nature of your relationship. But instead, we, the federal government, are telling you, this person whom you used to regard as your owner is now your boss. But let's go a step further. The freedmen are advised to do what? Remain quietly. Not go in the street and do whatever you want, but remain quietly. We're going to put those strictures on you the instant you are free. Remain quiet at your present home and do what? Work for wages. Not collectively bargain. Not get together and say, hey, you never paid us anything. This is our going rate today. Instead, stay where you are. Stay in your place. They are informed that they will not be what? Allowed to collect at military posts, and they are not allowed to do what? Be idle. What do you see at Stripes? What does that sign say at Stripes? No what? You newly freed Negroes cannot loiter. And if you do, you're going to have problems. This is why I say Juneteenth is a tragic holiday. And I'm sorry if you thought I was going to give you a kumbaya message today. I'm not. This is why it's a tragic holiday. Because even at the moment they are given freedom, they are not given dignity. You're not free to figure out your life. You're not free to go and tell this person what they're going to pay you and whether you're going to keep working for them. You are advised to stay where you are, stay in your place, because you occupy a caste that we need in this society, which is the untouchables of American society. Go to the next slide, please. So even in looking at Juneteenth, we start inauspiciously. Now, here's another reason I'm conflicted. Because I have the benefit of hindsight, right? I'm a 38-year-old man, blessed with an education, almost 200 years later. I cannot imagine what my forebears thought. Somebody came and said, you're free. You know how excited I would have been? You know how excited they were entitled to be? You know how excited we are entitled to be now? But looking back at it, it's tainted. It's tainted for a lot of reasons. Now, in the first celebrations of Juneteenth, one of the things I was happy to see is a lot of the newly freed people that had their old clothes, you know, where they worked before. They took them off and they stole the boss's clothes and they went and wore those around. I'm with that. I like that. And I hope really a big gang of them went like, yo, we're finna take all your clothes. No, you can't do that. What are you gonna do about it? Not a damn thing. Give me them clothes. I like that idea, right? I like that there was a radical response. And what you saw people doing is galvanizing across the state. So a lot of these freed communities would raise money to buy land to have celebrations for Juneteenth. And Juneteenth wasn't initially known as Juneteenth. It was actually known by a different name. You know what that name was? Well, Emancipation Day is a good guess. Jubilation's another good guess. It was actually known as Manumission Day. I take issue with, and I didn't know that until I did a little research myself, so don't feel bad. I thought it was Emancipation Day. What is the problem with terming it manumission? Anybody know what manumission means? It's Judge is preaching today. It's voluntary. Manumission implies that you have, by your own volition, chosen to make someone free. But that isn't what happened. And we start with the dishonesty. We start calling it manumission rather than we're taking them from you, because that's what it was. Legally, you no longer have this designation. So Juneteenth, Jubilee, Emancipation, those are better titles in my mind, because manumission implies a benevolence that did not exist. Let's be clear on that. But a lot of those groups would get together and buy land to have emancipation celebrations. The reason they did that is, do you think they were allowed to celebrate Juneteenth within the city limits? What do you think happened? Get arrested, lynchings, right? And if this person who used to be your master is now your boss, what does she tell you when June 19th come around? You ain't getting up. You think you're finna get off? We got benefits here. What are you saying? You're lucky I'm paying you anything. So a lot of times they were relegated to rural places. And, you know, it's really interesting. In preparation to speak to y'all, I was on Facebook a couple days ago, and a dear friend of mine who's also from Austin just coincidentally posted, hey, man, y'all remember when we used to have those huge Juneteenth celebrations at Rosewood Park, which is where one of the places in Austin that they do big Juneteenth celebrations. And what I learned when I started doing research is the first one in Austin was held in 1900. And what it was an emancipation group that got together and raised money to buy land to have Emancipation Park. The same is true in Houston. If you go to Houston, there's a famous high school called Jack Yates High School. Well, Jack Yates High School is named after the famous Reverend Jack Yates, who was one of the early heads of the emancipation group in Houston. And what he did is saved a bunch of money among his parishioners and bought land to create Emancipation Park, where they today still have Juneteenth celebrations. One of the things I thought was really important about these early celebrations is that a lot of it focused on family history. This, to me, is one of the most tragic aspects of the black experience in America, is the severing of our family history. And there are a lot of people who have done a lot of genealogical studies. Don't misunderstand me. But if you know 5, 6, 7 generations back, that is a privilege that a lot of people don't have, me included. I had to tell you today, my mother is literally from the area where Juneteenth first took place, okay? We know a lot of our family there, but we don't know everybody. I don't know whether there was someone in that crowd when General Order 3 was read. That is a consequence of being black in America. And I like the idea that there was a focus on family history. Okay? There's also parades and promenades. And this picture is really cool. Where do you think this picture is from? Are you able to see? This picture is from the 1913 Emancipation celebration here in Corpus Christi, actually. So there's a bunch of people gathered around the stage. I'm sure there was some music going, some barbecue, some cake walking, and definitely some trash talking. Because, you know, we get together, we talking noise. Go next. All right. And here's another picture I wanted to show y'all. Emancipation Day here in Corpus Christi. So, very stately. I don't want to imagine the smell behind that horse, but nonetheless, Emancipation Day in 1913. Okay, so raise your hand if you've been to a Juneteenth celebration before. All right. What kind of food do you see at a Juneteenth celebration? You said ribs? Big red. Oh, big red, you're right. Big red, what else? Watermelon, what else? Collard greens, what else? Red velvet cake? I like red velvet too. Anything red? Raise your hand if you ever seen a cakewalk. Y'all seen a cakewalk? Okay, what is a cakewalk? Why you raise your hands confidently and then get shy when I ask you? I know. Ooh, don't call on me. I think I heard of a cakewalk. Walk in a circle. But what do you do in that circle? What did you say? Somebody say eat cake? You win cake. But I like the idea of eating cake even better. You're just walking around in a circle eating cake. But it's kind of like musical chairs. But I remember growing up, the cakewalk that happened at my church every summer about this time for Juneteenth. And it's interesting because It's something, as a black Texan in particular, that is so ingrained in our culture, but I never knew all of the underpinnings of it until I really started looking, including food. If you go to a Juneteenth celebration, a lot of the food, a lot of the things that you see is red. And red is a commonly symbolic color for what? Blood, life, thank you, blood, right? And what it typified and what it signifies, the red, even in the Pan-African flag, in the UNIA flag and other flags, it stands for blood, but it stands for resilience, right? The resilience of the people who dealt with chattel slavery, right? And if you're brand new right after emancipation, that would be something that would be really incredibly important to you because you came through one of the worst ordeals people have ever gone through. But those colors are not random. I did not know until I did a little research, but having done Ancestry DNA, I found that some of my people are from Benin and Togo in Africa and Ghana, right? And in those societies, there is the kola nut and there's the hibiscus, right? Anybody ever had hibiscus tea before? All right? Okay, kola nut, you use that for energy, you may chew it, you may steep it in a tea. That's the reason when you go to a Juneteenth celebration, there's Big Red, there's red punch, there's a lot of red drinks because Africans who were brought here who used the kola nut and hibiscus continued carrying that on, right? So today, it's in a little different form. It's in, high fructose corn syrup in your Big Red. I don't think they quite expected that when they came over. But nonetheless, that color is not random. That color is from years of having meaning, and that meaning being blood and go next, please. Okay, but here's the other thing. When Juneteenth came about, I'm almost done, I promise, all right? I heard that before. He's like, I've been on your juries. What are you talking about? Get off the stage. No, he hasn't, really. He's a judge. I'm still scared of judges even when I'm not in court, but that's not the point. The point is, Judge, was Juneteenth did it immediately take storm across the United States? Did people start celebrating it everywhere? Okay, and in going to history, what happened right after the Civil War? What part of the time did we go into in history? Reconstruction. What happened in Reconstruction? Jim Crow came after that. You had black people who were actually elected to public office. You had the three major amendments, the 13th, which did what? Abolish slavery.
Except for prisons.
Except for the prison system. Yeah. We'll talk about the Fifth Circuit when we get done. The 14th Amendment, the due process and all of that, right? Privileges and Immunities Clause. And the 15th, what is the 15th Amendment? The right to vote, okay? So you saw the civil rights era, I'm sorry? If you're male, that's right. Thank you, because it wasn't that our sisters had the opportunity to vote until when? Yeah, shout out to Seneca Falls, right? Okay, but in any event, it was not something that immediately took root. And the reason I put this here is because even in the 1960s, like in 1968, 100 years later, students who were protesting in Atlanta were wearing Juneteenth freedom buttons, okay? And the march, the Poor People's March in Washington, when people left that, they went back to places like Minneapolis and Milwaukee, and they established and celebrated Juneteenth. And what's really interesting about that is now there are Juneteenth celebrations across the country. I went to Howard University. Y'all heard her say that, right? The preeminent university in the United States of America. I want to be clear, your vice president did attend there. Yes, she did. We didn't go there at the same time. But that's a different conversation. In any event, I tell you that. When I met people at Howard, they told me that they celebrated Juneteenth. And I thought that was very peculiar. Because as a black Texan, we think of that as really being a holiday that is a Texas holiday. But it is something that has taken root. And something you won't see in the slides, but you know from history, what happened not long after emancipation, I guess within the 50 to 100 years, what happened with a lot of freed slaves from the South? Where did they go? What do they call it? The Great what? I have a buddy from college who's from Chicago, born and raised, and he sounds countryer than anybody I have ever met in my life. And I remember when I met him, I'm like, you're from Chicago? You sure enough from Mississippi? You know, but that is the consequence of the Great Migration. I tell you that to say this. It started taking root when people from around the country recognized how important this holiday was, because Juneteenth is not only important to Texas enslaved people or newly free people, it is the last point at which anybody in the United States was legally enslaved, right? So it would take root across the country, and it's a good thing that it has. Go one more, please, Nick. So when you go to the next slide, here's what's important, and here's a part of the tragedy with this, okay? So Juneteenth did not become a state holiday in the very state where it happened until what year? 1980, 6 years before I arrived. 1980. More than 100 years later, in the very state where it happened. And people had to fight for that to happen. And in 1980, the state had its first state-sponsored Juneteenth celebration. Now, who is this woman on the screen? Y'all know who this is? I mean, her name should be up there. Y'all see the name? She's laughing in the back like, yeah, her name is up there. Why didn't y'all say it? Okay, Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth. She's from Marshall, Texas, which is, I guess, northeast, and I guess now lives in Fort Worth. But for 40 years, she is the one who beat the drum to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. When did Juneteenth become a federal holiday? 2020 what? 2021. What happened in 2020?